Hi, my name is Tyler. This is not Aftertouch Audio. But no, some of you guys might know me over from my YouTube channel. Most of my videos are scripted, so I usually read through a script and they're a lot edited down. So this will be one of my first ESC presentations since teaching, I think, like 5 years ago. So if I stumble throughout this, just bear with me as we get through it. But for those of you who don't know me, hi, my name is Tyler. I am a sound designer. I'm a freelance sound designer more specifically. I've worked on things like games, films, movies, commercials, podcasts, audiobooks, sound effects libraries, and even done some forensic audio. So you tend to have a lot of different types of workflow throughout your day-to-day life. As you might understand, games has a completely different workflow from films, and from podcasts, from audiobooks, sound effects libraries, and even different types of forensic-based audio. But while films, movies, and commercials all follow under like the same esque nature of like workflows, they do tend to have different components to the workflows, whether they be a more stripped down version of it or depends on what role you are taking on this presentation. Which is where I kind of like to start off the whole conversation is, well, what role are you actually doing? So we're going to quickly meet the sound team in terms of like what roles you can be hired on for. As a freelancer, I can get hired on to be to do a very specific role, or I can be hired on to do the entire project. So it could be very much a project where I'm hired on to do just ambiences. And if I'm hired on to do just ambiences, well, the workflow that I'm going to share with you guys today is just the same workflow, just stripped down into that one component. Versus if I'm hired on to do the entire film or the entire project, I can either hire out people to help me out with particular spaces, or I can do it all myself. So it's good to know the types of roles that you can be hired on to do, and I'll kind of go over the majority of the major ones here today. So meeting the sound team, we start off with the sound designer, and the sound designer is responsible for conceptualizing and creating the overall sonic landscape of the film. They do work closely with the director to develop the creative vision for the sound, the creative vision of the sound, and they oversee the sound team. So they are in charge of everything that goes on sound-wise. Then you have the supervising sound editor. They coordinate and manage the sound editing process. They work very closely with the sound designer, and they oversee the entire sound design team. They are responsible for various aspects of the sound editing, including dialogue editing, sound effects editing, and Foley editing. So they will go ahead and help either do or coordinate all of that. Then you have your dialogue editors. The dialogue editor is responsible for cleaning up the edited dialogue tracks, ensuring clarity and consistency of the spoken lines. They also handle such tasks as synchronization between the microphones. They do ADR coordination. They don't necessarily do ADR, but they can. And they deal with dialogue continuity. So between different scenes that are shot, they'll deal with all of that. And then you have your sound effects editors. So your sound effects editors create or select various sound. Sorry, the sound effects editors will create or select and edit a variety of sound effects to enhance the on-screen action or environmental elements. So basically everything that you hear can be attributed to a sound effects editor or a sound designer. They will work very closely with the sound designer to design and implement a comprehensive library of sound effects for the project. Then you have your Foley artists. They typically come in pairs of 3. You have your Foley recordist, you have your Foley artist, and you have your Foley editors. But what they do is they perform and record live sound effects that are synchronized to the visuals. Foley editors then integrate and edit the Foley recorded sounds to a final mix. They help add depth and realism to the sound design. And then finally, the last sort of major role that you'll hear all the time is a re-recording mixer. The re-recording mixer is responsible for blending and balancing all of the sound elements, including the dialogue, the music, the effects, all into a final mix. And this kind of goes without saying, they tend to work very closely with the director and the sound team to achieve the desired sonic balance and emotional impact of the films. There are more roles than this. They can be other type of specialized roles like ADR mixers, sound recordists, sound assistants, technical support personnel. There's a bunch of like different branches of categories of this. So like under sound effects editor, you can very much have just a BG editor, so someone who just specializes in backgrounds. You can have a BG and BG effects editor, so someone who will cut the backgrounds and then all the background effects. You can have just a vehicle sound designer. So instead of it just being like a sound editor that cuts absolutely everything, you can split these up into individual roles. You can even have one where it's just doing creatures, or you can have a role that's just doing things. But for the purpose of this sort of talk, we're going to basically treat you guys as a sound designer. You are the person taking the entire project by the reins, and you're doing everything on your own. And again, this workflow will work if you just start parting out people as well. So if you take on the project and you need to hire Foley editors or your Foley team, you can integrate that seamlessly into this workflow as well. So let's say you got the job. Now what? Well, it depends. It strongly depends on what you are actually hired on to do. So if you're hired on as the sound designer, we will go through the entire workflow start to finish. If you're working on a feature film, typically you will take on more of these roles versus if you're working on a 30-second commercial, you'll probably do less of these roles. But it's a good place to start with a spotting session. And a spotting session is a collaborative meeting between the filmmakers or directors and the sound team. This typically includes the sound designer, the sound editors, and our sound mixers, but can also include other departments such as the visual effects team and editors. I've had several spotting sessions where it's just the sound team and the director, or it can also be the sound team, the director, the visual effects artists, even some of the actors and producers might come into the spotting session. It's really just a big collaborative meeting where you all sit down and watch the film. You ask as many questions as you want, and we can kind of go through it. But the primary objective of the session is to discuss and determine the specific placement and treatment of sound elements in a film or visual media production. So what are the actual goals of it here? Well, the first thing is to really understand the filmmaker's vision. This is where you can come and you can ask a bunch of questions about the film. You can ask about the story. You can ask about the emotional impact scene by scene by scene. What should the audience be feeling in an X, Y, and Z? Believe it or not, music is not the only way that you can convey emotion into a scene. Sound plays a very big role in this. If anyone has ever watched the latest Batman film, the one with the Riddler, if you really pay attention to the rain in the background, they're all the rain is very much catered towards what emotion you should be hearing on screen. Whether it is a soft, intimate scene, the rain is very light and very fragile. Whereas when Batman and he's fighting all these other people, the rain is very aggressive and it's very sharp sounding. And even when they're doing their investigations inside of a building, the rain hitting the building sounds like boiling water. So like you can very much cater your sound design towards a specific emotion. So understanding the filmmaker's vision is very, very important. And then the next step is to identify the major sound elements. So the spotting session will allow the filmmakers and the sound team to identify various sound elements that are required within the project. This includes dialogue, music, sound effects, ambient sounds, Foley, all the auditory components and the overall sound design. Next step, you're going to want to figure out defining the sound objectives. So the filmmakers will go ahead and convey their vision and expectations regarding the sound design. They discuss the desired emotional impact of each scene, the stylistic approach that they were looking at taking, any technical requirements that the sound elements might need, as well as we'll work through the different scenes and sequences. From there, we're looking at placement and balance as well. The spotting session will also help you determine the placement and balance within the film. This includes deciding which sound should be predominant, how they should interact with the dialogue and music, and the overall balance of the spatialization audio to help enhance the storytelling. So placement and balance, if there's something, for example, we are in just an apartment. Well, where is that apartment located in space? What should they be hearing in the background? Should we have a dog barking in the background, which would kind of indicate a rural sort of urban area, or should we go with seagulls and beach noise on the outside? These are elements that you don't necessarily see, but they help place you sonically within a particular world, which does lead me on to my next point, discussing the sonic atmospheres. Where are we? What should we be hearing at a specific point in time? Are we in a busy city, a serene forest, a future spaceship? And even just things like geographically where we are. So, if any of you guys are in Canada and you go out to the beaches, you might notice that the Canadian seagulls sound very different than the Californian seagulls. They have a totally different sound source than us. So if you were working on a film that's primarily shot in the US and you're cutting in a Canadian seagull, it doesn't necessarily work. Or you will get some directors that are also very big nature lovers, and they will also go ahead and let you know what birds are native to the area. This can be quite difficult to kind of organize if you don't have a significant library of bird sounds. So discussing the sonic atmospheres is a really good way to kind of like iron out these issues before you actually start working on a film. And then last thing is just technical considerations. If you're going through the film and you're finding that, some lines could be 80 yards, some lines you might have alternate takes for. Maybe you are working on a film where it has a very specific vehicle and you don't have that vehicle. Well, maybe setting aside a budget for sound effects libraries or certain types of mixing formats, like you have to hit minus 23 LUFS plus or minus 2 dB on either side. So that's a good place to kind of come here and be like, okay, all of our sounds need to be at this loudness around this level, and then we can kind of work our way through there. The last thing is just collaboration and feedback. It is a very good place for you to just ask questions, and it is a very good place for you to relay your experiences, and it's a place for you to put your creative voice into the film as well. And it's a place where you can kind of talk to the directors, talk to the producers, talk to the visual effects team, or whoever is involved in the sound spotting session, and really kind of make your voice heard, but also hear everyone else's voice. Spotting sessions are important. They don't always happen, but they are highly encouraged in order to have a direction as to where you are going to go. The next major thing after the spotting session is done, what do you need? Like you're done the spotting session, you don't have any of the materials yet, but you need a video and you need some sort of audio. So the way I've broken this section down is into three pieces. One is the audio components, one is the video components, and one is the extra stuff that really helps but is not really needed. But on the audio side of things, you're going to need an AAF, minimum of 5-second handles. And what handles are is when you cut a piece of audio, you will have nothing on either side of it. However, the handles tell you how much you can extend that audio out on either end. It's really helpful for finding things like room tone. It's really helpful for things like making the fade ins and fade outs a bit more natural. It is really helpful for even just shifting dialogue around ever so slightly, or just creating fade in and fade out. So minimum of 5 seconds handles is what I tend to go for. If I find the dialogue is a bit rougher, I'll usually ask for a bit more. If I find the dialogue is pretty clean, 5 seconds usually works. But I like to find room tone within the actual tracks themselves, so I usually ask for a little more than 5-second handles. All the audio should be done in .wave format, 24-bit, 48 kilohertz, and a 2-pop placed at 59, 58 within the timeline. This is for synchronization issues. And so when the film editors send you the film, if you have a 2-pop, you can actually line up your mix with a 2-pop. What I end up doing is also including a tail pop as well. So the tail pop is 2 frames exactly after the last frame of the film. And what the 2-pop and the tail pop do is, if I send a mix over to the video editors and they bring it in and they line up the 2-pop with their 2-pop, but my 2-pop doesn't line up with their 2-pop, they know that something wrong happened within the export. And instead of spending hours trying to figure out that, hey, there's a synchronization issue, they can be like, hey, your mix doesn't line up, fix it. Or it could be an issue on their end. It's a really quick way to identify problems before they waste a ton of time. On the video side of things, however, QuickTime movie files with visual burn-in timecode, There's a couple bits of debate on like where the time code burn should be. The most common one I see is at the very bottom of the screen, very center. I personally like to receive it in the top left. The reason being is if it's in the bottom middle, it's really hard to sync footsteps, or it's really cumbersome to sync footsteps at times. So I tend to ask for it in the top left. It's very unobstructive up there, and I can quickly look up and make sure that my time or that the frame rate matches my frame rate. I've also had the time code burn block effects. There was a shot of a table, and there was keys on the table, but I couldn't see the keys until this character came and picked up the keys. So it was like having it in the top left just kind of like helps fix those types of things. The video frame rate must match the frame rate of the exported AAF. If it doesn't, get them to resend it to you. It will save you a lot of headaches after you finish your work. If there's any problems with AAFs and stuff like that, just send them back. They're very easy to re-export and stuff like that. So on the video format side of things, Apple ProRes.movie or an Avid DNX HD. I don't use H.264. It tends to create some frame rate drops issues. But .mov tends to be really good in Nuendo. .dnx HD tends to be really good in Pro Tools. Those seem to be the preferred format for most things. But again, experiment with what kind of works for you guys. These are the two that I found that works the best for those particular DAWs. I don't need a 4K video. You can if you want. 4K videos generally will go ahead and have like a lot more processing power. They're 4 times bigger than some of these other files. So 1920 by 1080p is usually good enough for me, or 1280 by 720. I just need to be able to see the video and see the film. You can get like external boxes. I have one here by Blackmagic. It basically processes the video for me, so it doesn't actually like take up any processing power off my computer to play back the video. Super helpful, but again, I still just like the 1920 by 1080p. It keeps the file sizes down. This one is not. This is the very first like non-required thing, but it really helps you when you're working collaboratively with other sound designers. Is the embedded audio. The embedded dialogue is either panned left or right, and the music and effects are panned the opposite direction. The reason for this being is if I'm sending this out to a Foley department, or if I just want to go ahead and have a Foley mix, I can just mute the left channel, which contains all the music and effects. And then I can just listen to the dialogue. I can sync everything to my picture with just the dialogue. I can mute all that other stuff. Or if I need to send this off to the composer, then I can have the music and effects played up. That way they can hear what the director wanted emotionally to do, or however you want this to end up doing. This ends up just making the movie a much more easier format to actually send out. Last thing before I kind of get back into questions and stuff like that. The last big thing, this is all the extra stuff that's helpful but not necessarily required, is a PDF script, if possible, or finalized script. This really helps with like creating your ADR lines. Sometimes when you get the production sound in, it's really hard to make out what the dialogue is actually saying. But if you need to create an ADR list of what actually needs to be recorded, a PDF script will really help get you what was actually supposed to be said, and then you can organize an ADR session for that. A folder of the original production sound, organized scenes with wild lines separated into unique folder. This is really helpful for things like just finding alternate takes, finding wild ADR lines, finding wild tracks, on-location sound effects, room tone, and just ambience recorded on set. Super helpful to have access to all that stuff. We're working on a show. Actually, I just got the episode in yesterday. It has submarines and stuff in it, but there's a big hydraulic arm in the actual submarine. So we don't have access to a submarine and an arm, but the location sound recordist did record a big chunk of the hydraulic arm moving up and moving down and moving around. So we actually have access to those sounds from on location. So now we can go into the actual production sound and pull all that stuff out. How many projects are you working on at the same time? Do you find it hard to keep everything organized? I typically work on anywhere from currently I'm only doing like one at a time, but I have done projects where I've worked on like 3 or 4 at a time. It really depends on like what my workload is like. Not everything that you work on is going to be given to you at the same time. So I'll have dedicated days to do specific things, or do dedicated days to do specific tasks. I've been doing this a long time, so I kind of know roughly how long it will take me to do something and how long it will take me to kind of get to everywhere. So yeah, one at a time is what I'm doing at the moment. But that being said, I am working on a 13 episode series. I have a feature film at the end of the month. I have another feature film starting the month after that. And then I have another feature film starting the month after that. So the 13 episode series is going to run in parallel underneath all that. But I'm only going to get one episode like every 2 weeks or something. So that I hope that kind of helps. Sound reports are very helpful. They tell you things like the scene number, the take number, the bit rate, the sample depth. They tell you which microphone was used on which tracks, which really help mimicking ADR. Which actor on which track, quality of the audio that was recorded, any problem takes, wild lines. This really helps you kind of like find alternate takes. So if there's a scene where all of a sudden the camera is panned on one person and then it cuts to an over the shoulder shot, you can actually replace a lot of his lines or her lines with additional takes. Super helpful on that format. An EDL is an edit decision list. This is easy to describe in terms of I really wish more editors would do this in the lower end. But essentially what an edit decision list is, if they export you one when you get the film and they make any changes and they export you a second EDL, there are programs that you have. I don't know if Pro Tools does it, but I'm pretty sure it does. But Nuendo, I can import the EDL, the old one, I can import the new one, and it will automatically reconform my session based on what they've done. So they're super helpful. They save a ton of time. Not super required, because usually when you get the film, it's pretty locked. But if there's any sort of changes along the production, an EDL will get you out of a lot of jams. And then just any notes with exact timeline or with exact time code would be super helpful as well. But essentially, that is the three things that you will need to actually get started for the audio, video, and just extra stuff. And yeah, please, if anyone has any questions as we go through this, I tend to just like talk really fast. So if there's any questions, just please let me know. After I get all the material, I really tend to just watch the film a lot. I really want to understand the story. I really want to understand the characters, the mood, the perspective. And by doing this here, I can really start to curate a list of sounds or a set list of sounds that will help tell that story and will help convey that emotional impact. If I just watch it once or watch it whatever, then I'm just placing literal sounds as to what I think should be there. But you can find little moments where, the way the character closes the door is actually really important, because it can help tell a particular mood within the scene. So you can help really find those moments where it can help enhance the story. One of the biggest ones that I can remember most recently is Ford versus Ferrari. The first like 7 minutes of the film, Ford comes in and gives this big speech, and if you had watched the film, he's walking on this big concrete slab. But throughout the entire film, or throughout that entire scene, they replaced his feet with walking on a metal grate. It carried throughout the scene. It made him sound much bigger, much more powerful. And he's just telling a bunch of people like, hey, you're going to get fired if you don't come in with new ideas. So it made him feel a lot bigger than he was, rather than just like walking on concrete. So it's good to do that kind of stuff. As far as I know, not every DAW are able to work with AAF files. Do you recommend any kind of particular DAW for it? If you're working on stuff like films, Pro Tools is pretty well the industry standard. You're going to have a lot more people working with it. An OMF will also work. I prefer AAFs just because I tend to work in Nuendo the most. But yeah, an OMF or an AAF will absolutely work. I'm not a Pro Tools user and typically work on music and sound effects making an Ableton Live. Yeah, so if you're working with Ableton Live, it won't actually be able to import an AAF, so you'll kind of be a little stuck with it. So if you're looking at getting into like linear production stuff, absolutely learn Pro Tools. It's just what everyone uses, especially if you're working in like a collaborative sort of format. Pro Tools is the way to go. I tend to work in Nuendo because it's the DAW that I know the most. But it does support all these features. So what I can do is I can take all of my stuff in Nuendo, export an AAF for it, import it into Pro Tools, and then deliver a Pro Tools session. After you, of course, you go through the session to make sure everything translated well. Have you ever worked on something that is just not resonated with you at all? If yes, did it make it harder to work on? I have declined projects that I wasn't necessarily happy with. There were a particular. It hasn't happened often, but there's been like 3 or 4 projects where I watched the film like this just isn't for me. I definitely didn't start out that way. When I started out, I took on any project that I can get my hands on because food is expensive. But nowadays, I tend to take on the projects that I feel like I can add value to. So yes-ish, I will turn down projects if I feel like I can't add to it or if I'm just not the right person. But typically what I will do when I turn it down is I usually have another recommendation for them. So I will have a network of people where like, I can't do this, but let me help you find someone that can. But yeah, that's typically where that kind of question kind of falls down to. After you've watched the film a lot, notice how we haven't actually done anything yet. A lot of this is what's it called? Prep work. The more prep work you do before you actually start working, the less work you actually have to do in the session. You can iron out a lot of details. You'll end up working out a lot faster. Which pops down to my last point before we actually get into like like working in a DAW format, is research. If you are, for example, working on a project like a horror film and you don't watch horror films, it might be a good idea to start watching some horror films. Understanding things like the sound sources that popular horror films use, understanding the layers, the creative mixing stuff, the reverb, just anything that can kind of help you kind of like get into the space. If you're working on like a kids horror game, well, they're very different than working on like, let's say, a Dead by Daylight game where all the sounds are scarier and not as fun. Fun being like bubbly. So it really kind of depends what you're working on. But if you are not sure about what to work on, doing research about what other things are happening within the sound world yourself is very helpful. I had no idea. Definitely, there's a tool called AAF Translator that converts a DAW specific. I haven't used it on Ableton. Wow, actually, I didn't know AAF Translator would work in Ableton. It is good to use tools like that, but you limit yourself to only working by yourself. So learning a program like Pro Tools will allow you to be able to work on bigger productions. So like I typically get hired out as a freelancer to work on projects that are collaborative with other people. However, I do get hired on to do projects that are collaborative, so which means I need to be able to send sessions back and forth. So if you're doing it in Ableton, typically what will end up happening is you'll end up working on the project on your own, unless you can get it out of Ableton and into a program that your re-recording mixer can actually utilize. So I'll just throw that out there. DAW doesn't, like, yes, DAWs don't necessarily matter in terms of like the overall soundscape of what you're doing. Like if you're working on a game, it doesn't really matter unless everyone is doing their own stuff or collaborating between sessions, because you're just exporting finished sounds at the end. But if you're working on films and stuff like that, the DAW kind of matters when you start getting into the bigger projects. But yeah, research, absolutely. Watch films, understand what other people are doing and how other people are telling stories, and it'll help you be able to tell stories. But we're finally into actually like working. So after we've gone through the spotting session, we've gone through, we've collected all the materials, we've gotten all the stuff, we've done our research, we understand the film. Now let's start importing stuff. So AAF, or in this case, OMF organization, you're going to import the AAF and you're going to organize the dialogue onto dialogue tracks, the production effects onto production effects tracks, the effects onto effects tracks, and music onto music tracks. You're going to organize all of this stuff to make your life so much easier. These are prefixes that I use. So I have a console in front of me, but the character limit is, I think, 7 or 8 characters. So we use DX, PFX, FX, and MX, so that on the console it shows up much clearer. But yeah, you really want to make sure that your AAF is organized. Some AAFs that you get are extremely organized. They're very well tailored to a sound designer's workflow. Other ones are a mess. If you ever get a program from Final Cut Pro, typically what ends up happening there is Final Cut Pro doesn't use audio tracks. They use floating audio, which does mean the AAFs tend to come in a bit of a mess. PFX are your production effects. So if, for example, like I'm talking and I pick up my phone and I put my phone down, the phone down would be considered a production effect. It's not like an intended recorded effect. It's just like a production effect. But in terms of like AAF organization, some programs do it better, some do it worse. I've spent like 3-4 days organizing a PFX track or an AAF, just because when it comes in, it is just like 340 tracks and it's just terrible. You can send these back and get them to redo it. But for some of the smaller bass productions, it's typically not worth it. So you end up just going through it. And then sometimes you get it and they're really organized. It doesn't take you that long. But organize your AAF, make sure you have everything there. It tells you what you have, what you don't have, what you're missing, and all that jazz. Then you work with templates. What's the core difference between PFX and effects? So the PFX are anything that is recorded on set. So it could be if you have a scene where a character is chopping wood and there's no dialogue over top of it, all that chopping wood would be considered a production effect because it's happening on production. The effects tracks would be considered anything that the editors put in. So it could be rain, it could be traffic, it could be ambience, it could be a car by. It's anything that they would have pulled from a library and put in to kind of help tell you what they are going for. So if they put a siren in or like a tinnitus thing when a character gets hit, it kind of makes you think a little bit about what their direction actually is. Versus a production effect, you wouldn't hear any of that stuff. So that's mainly the difference. The production effects is recorded on set. The effects is done after the fact. But when working with templates, I'm going to show you guys my latest template here. But essentially, templates are something that you can work with on your own. So I have a template here that I work with on my personal projects. But then I also have templates that if I'm working on a collaborative format, I work and I conform my workflow to their templates. So if I'm not mixing the film, I need to make sure that the re-recording mixer delivers a session that they are comfortable using. And if they want the dialogue on specific tracks or they want the effects organized a specific way, I will conform my workflow to what they're doing. But having templates helps you immensely. And I get asked all the time on my Discord, am I ever going to sell my template? And long story short, the answer is no. I did create a video tutorial series on how to build your own templates. But essentially what ends up happening is you end up relying too heavily on my templates rather than building your own. And my template evolves all the time. So like, for example, this template I built for a show that we're going to be working on very soon. And I have these tracks down here that are specifically catered towards this film, which contain, if I pull up the effects tracks, speakerphone presets that we've designed for different types of music in different cars. So now all of a sudden, if I like the music to come out of the car, I can just drag the music cue from these tracks down to these tracks, and it works really quickly. The other thing that we're going to be dealing with in this film is a lot of radio communication. So I have all of these FUTS tracks down here so that I can put any voice I want through a FUTS track. I also have all of my plugins that I particularly process my dialogue, and they change out all the time. Waves, WNS, Mono, they're all bypassed, by the way. So like they're not doing anything. I only activate them if I do need them. Pro Q3 is the only one that I have any sort of preset on, which is just a low roll off and a quick 350 hertz mid dip. Kind of helps deal with any sort of how do you call mud. Soothe 2 for the dialogue, a de-esser. Again, all this stuff is bypassed. None of this is actually doing anything, solely because I really want to make the edit as clean as possible. I don't know what this YouTube playlist is. Oh yeah, that's probably my template videos. So anyways, building out a template that works for your project really, really helps. I tend to mix a lot with VCA faders. I tend to mix a lot with that other stuff, and I will be referencing this template back in just a few minutes about BGs. So build out your templates to cater towards the projects that you're working on. The actual workflow will be very, very similar between projects. Just there are some quality of life things that you can kind of get away with by doing this kind of stuff. Like, for example, Foley under the cloth tracks. If I don't have a bunch of time to do cloth, we use Reformer Pro. So I can do like shoes on gravel, denim movements, and I can just speak into the mic, and then I can translate that into whatever sound I actually want, whether it be a suede shirt, or a leather couch sit down, or a car door open, or gear, or anything. I can kind of blend between 2 or 4 sounds. Super helpful stuff there. But yeah, build out your templates per project that you're working on. Really helps it out. So have a template. If you are working on a collaborative format, ask your re-recording mixer for their template, so that way you can kind of cater your workflow to them. It's a very common request. They're usually very happy to provide it for you because it makes their life a lot easier. Going forward, we're going to start with the dialogue edit. A lot of people tend to just jump in and they start doing effects and stuff like that. That's not particularly helpful when you're doing everything on yourself. The dialogue edit is 100% where you need to start. Split the dialogue by camera shot or by actor. Get used to both of these. Whether you are doing it where you have 8 dialogue tracks and you just checkerboard them based on who's talking, and you only have 8 dialogue tracks with your entire session, that's a very common workflow. The other more common workflow is to split them off into by actor. There are some times where I like it one way. There are some times where I like it the other way. And there's sometimes where I actually like it with both. When you're doing reality TV shows, there's usually 2 types of storylines going on, where they cut away to an interview. And typically each character will have their own track on that. And then you have the main story, which I will do a checkerboard thing. And the main reason for that is I can create 2 VCA faders for those 2 groups of tracks. And then I can mix the level between the main story and the in situs with just 2 faders. It makes life a lot easier. Organize the FUTS dialogue onto its own track. So like if you're going to if there's a lot of like phone conversations back and forth, put them on their own tracks, and then create overlaps between the camera edits. From there, you're going to use the provided room tone or create your own. You can create your own by finding dead space in your audio handles. So remember when we asked for 5 seconds minimum of audio handles? That's usually where you'll find your room tone. If they don't provide you with room tone, you can do that. What overlap between camera edits? It's essentially when you do this, you have a dialogue and a dialogue, and usually what ends up happening is they cut the dialogue like this, so there's no overlap. You will want to go ahead and create that overlap so you can fade between the 2 of them. So that's it's just a normal crossfade, because when you get the AAFs, they'll typically look like that, or are actually more like that. And then when you bring them down to their own tracks, you want to make sure that there's nice overlap so you can do a nice fade between the 2 of them. So create your own room tones. I personally don't like relying on RX for ambience creation. I like to use the natural room tones. So finding that in between lines or creating your own room tones that way is very, very helpful. If you can't find room tone and they didn't record any room tone, RX is a great sort of like bail me out of jail type stuff. You can also use room tone to remove unwanted sounds between words, and you can use room tone to create clean fade outs. So, for example, if you have a line here and you have a particularly problematic piece of, like, let's say like a click or a pop between words here, you can actually use room tone to cut out that section. You can bring in a new set of room tone and then crossfade between the 2 of them. and that way you're actually using room tone to fill in spaces where it doesn't help. Or I can use room tone to cut off the tail here, and I can create a nice clean fade out on the end. That's basically dialogue editing in a nutshell. But once you start getting into the more advanced stuff, you can use clip gain to make sure that your dialogue is done to the desired loudness. You should have a loudness standard that you are working towards. One of the more common broadcast standards is minus 23 LUFS. I think Netflix now is at minus 27, but you're going to work towards that. Use alternate words or syllables from different takes. So when you asked for all that production sound and all those extra lines, you can actually use alternate words or alternate takes to fix problematic lines. Like, let's say there was a big loud bang at the end of one of the sentences, but it's only affecting the end of the sentence. I can go back into the production sound, find an alternative take, and bring that in. And if you if you splice between words on like hard syllables like B, D, K, P, or T, your edits will be much less noticeable than if you were to do it in between words. That's a nice little tip there. Some problem sounds can be hidden with additional room tones or ambiances, which is going to be our next big step. Some audio problems just can't be smoothed out, but can be hidden within your mix. It's a trick that we use all the time. And then just replace what cannot be fixed or is unintelligible. So if you have alternate takes, or if you don't have any alternate takes, you can recommend some ADR. And then, use wild lines when appropriate. So essentially, if you have a big wide shot, they're called establishing shots. The boom microphone can't actually get in there. But what they might do, and what I always tend to recommend to the location sound team, is record whatever they're doing close up with the boom off camera, and then we can actually like take that sound and put it into that situation, because you're not going to see their lips move anyway. So synchronization isn't a big deal. From there, dialogue editing, EQ, reverb, compression, noise reduction. These are tools I typically commonly see when doing a dialogue edit. With that being said, don't do it. A dialogue edit should be focusing on the actual raw sound and making good edits rather than hiding edits with plugins. If you are doing a dialogue edit and you are delivering this to a re-recording mixer, they may not have your EQ, they may not have your reverb, they may not have your compression plugins, and they might not have your noise reduction plugins. Or even worse, if you commit these, then they have no play or no flexibility with decisions within the mix. Your goal of a dialogue edit is really to make the natural sound that was recorded on set as good as you can get it without the use of plugins. I still use RX to remove things like clicks, pops, generator hums, oddball bird sounds and stuff like that. Like I will clean up the dialogue, but I won't do any like noise reduction. I leave that to the mixing stage. And there's a big reason for it. And because the next step that we get into is ambiances. And the whole goal of ambiances is to create ambiances that complement the natural room tones of what's on set. And you want to try to match the tones of the natural soundscapes. If you do your ambiances good, what ends up happening is your noisy dialogue that you would have processed a lot, you can actually process very little, and you can keep it a lot more natural. Your whole goal of ambiances is to find a bed of noise that the dialogue can fall very seamlessly into and come seamlessly out of, and not create sudden jumps in volume and sudden jumps in the sound, the background noise. If you have dialogue that is doing that with all your ambiances, you can choose to either add more ambiances to kind of create a more noisier soundscape, or you can reduce the noise in the dialogue at that time. You will process your sounds a lot less, you will deal with a lot less headache, and you won't have thin dialogue that doesn't sound very great. So I always usually start with the dialogue edit, and then I move into doing BGs. That is the biggest goal of doing this here. However, on my Discord, I tend to get a lot of questions about BGs. Some people ask, in a stereo mix, do you still need mono BGs? Absolutely. Absolutely. In my BG template, this is a 5-1 mixing template. However, I still do the exact same process in a stereo mixing template. I still do the exact same process in a 7.1 template or a 7.4 template. It's the exact same process. I have 4 stereo tracks here that go to my first 2 speakers. I have 3 mono tracks that go to my center speaker. And I have 2 surround sound tracks that go to my back 2 speakers. If I'm working in stereo, these just come up here and become 4 stereo tracks. Or sorry, 6 stereo tracks rather than 4 stereo tracks. The mono stuff, if you really want to think about it this way, your stereo BGs are going to be very wide, like very, very wide. But your dialogue is usually mono, so it's going to fall in this gap of nothingness. Your edits are going to be a lot more noticeable. You won't be able to hide as much shoddy edits or just like awkward camera cuts. If you have a full set of BGs that match your room tones through the mono and the stereo, they end up really helping overall help have your dialogue and your ambiences work better together. So that's typically where I go. Start with your dialogue edit, move over to ambiences. The next big step is I start on the sound effects and Foley. If I'm doing everything myself, I usually treat this here as one big thing, but I only do broad strokes. From your spotting session, you should have gotten a very comprehensive list of everything that you want to highlight. By highlighting all those elements, you should be able to go through the film and start highlighting all those elements and get something down for something. Simple sounds. Try to get all the majority of your sounds down and just get something down and work your way through the film. Reason being is it's really hard to just stare at a blank timeline and go scene by scene by scene by scene by scene, rather than if you start with something, then you can go back and you can spot edit or scene edit. So once you have something down for everything, then you go back and you look at each scene and you just start working your way through each scene. Flush out the broad strokes effects, cut any missing effects that you may have missed in your first pass, fill out the ambience and spatial effects. You can start looking at more character-based things like the background elements. So if, for example, in between words and dialogue, you have these awkward pauses, maybe a bird can help bridge that awkward gap of silence, or a distant dog bark, or maybe a lawnmower can help. Anything that you can do to kind of help fill up the scene and really kind of manage the scene, it super helps. Go with a nice big broad stroke of just trying to get something down for something, and then go ahead and try to add more character throughout the scenes. As we move through there, once you have all that stuff done, then it's just time to mix. And typically what I do with a mix is I try to do an EQ, volume, and a pan mix first. I really just try to get everything I try to get my mix sounding as good with these 3 plugin processes before I start adding a bunch of plugins. You'd be so surprised how well you can get a mix done just with these 3 processes. After I kind of gone through that whole mix and process, I really rely on I just mix, review, mix, review, mix, review, mix, review. You go through your reverb spaces. This is where I'll apply my reverbs. This is where I'll apply my compression if it's needed. This is where I'll apply my noise reduction. This is where I will apply a bunch of stuff. If you want to combine this mix and this mix into one big process, you can. I've found I've had better results doing volume, EQ, pan, mix, but realistically, it just comes down to what works for you. But anyways, that is my workflow. That's what's worked for myself. I was trained on through a re-recording mixer of I think 40 years. So he was definitely one of the ways that it was helpful to kind of help shape my workflow and stuff like that. So it's super helpful. On this workflow, when it comes to exporting a 7.1 or other surround formats, who is the person in charge of this kind of mixing? Your re-recording mixer is the person who would be in charge of this. Is it mandatory to use Dolby Atmos for it, or is there another ways? Typically what ends up happening is whatever you're mixing to, you will mix the biggest set that you will do. So if you're mixing Dolby Atmos, you will mix in Dolby Atmos. If you are mixing in 5-1, I don't really mix stereo and then up mix. It's really easy to take like a 5-1 mix and then down mix it. There are plugins here. So like this is a 5-1 template. I will have to deliver a 5-1 mix for this show. However, on my buses, I do have a plugin called Halo Downmix, which will basically take my 5-1 channels and then downmix them down to stereo. You can do this manually. It's fairly straightforward. All you would do is you would take your individual mixes, your dialogue, your music, your effects. You would bounce out the 5.1. You'd bring them into a new session, and then you can manually fold these yourself. Netflix does have a guide on how to do this. I'll see if I can find it and just quickly put it in the chat. Netflix. Yeah, here it is. Mix. Yeah, here you go. So there's your mix best practices for a 2-field setup, a 5.1 setup, and I believe in here there is language on how to fold it down as well. Fold. Folders. Yeah, here it is. 2.4 near field to 2.0 stereo mix mastering and achieve goals. So it walks you through how to like fold down all that stuff. Bit off topic, but do you still actively use or at least recommend Stream Deck software in your audio production workflow, regardless of someone working in the game audio industry? Yeah. I'll kind of show you what I'm kind of working with if I can get the thing to come this way, or I might just move the webcam. I might just move the webcam. Let me toggle screen sharing. Let's leave toggle camera shift. Okay, nope, that's not it. I know. Are you guys able to see me bigger, or is it just this screen recording? Stream Deck info. Device setting. I don't know how to end the. Oh, stop sharing. Boom. There. Now I'm bigger. So essentially, we have a Stream Deck down here. I have a bunch of key commands here. So if I press the system settings, I can actually come through here and I can go into like the project setup, the studio setup, the audio connections, the QuickTime. If I come back, I have access to my automation. So there's all my automation windows. If I come back again, I have access to my control room. I have access to my track import features. I have access to all my transport controls down here. You go into your mix console. There's all my controls from my mix console. If I go back, I have access to my media bay. I have access to workspaces, profiles. I can zoom in and out. But notice all of my transport controls over here don't change. So if I go to like, actually files would be the only one. Editors, I go to track import. Maybe not. My transport controls down here don't change, but these ones here typically shouldn't change, although I haven't tried to find which ones actually do it. Either way, yeah, I highly recommend a Stream Deck. They're a lot of fun. Do you mix as you go along? Yeah, absolutely. I will balance a mix and I will balance elements as I go. If I share my screen again, go. Let me go into my effects folder. You'll notice that I have like sub 1, sub 2, sub 3, sub 4, sub 5. Within that subfolder, I'll have, and this is really extreme. You don't need to do this. This template is strictly for like this show where we're going to be dealing with a lot of cars. So like I have a lot more tracks that are in each of these subfolders. Usually like 5 mono and like 4 stereo is pretty good. But effectively, what I'll do is I'll cut an entire car on this one track, and then for the next car, I'll cut on this track. And then let's say there's a campfire. Well, then I'll cut on this track. And then when we change scenes, I'll come back up to this track and then I'll cut a campfire or I'll cut whatever. But yes, I will hands down, I mix as I go. It helps a lot in the mixing process. No. And by mixing as I go, by the way, I mean like volume. I don't add like a lot of plugins or anything like that. I mainly like on my plugin chain here, I literally just have Pro Q3. And the thing that I have with going on with Pro Q3 is I have this low cut. That's the only thing that's active. Main reason being is all of my tracks have this low cut. And if I want low end, I will add it in. If I don't need low end, I won't have it in. And it's just by default. But yeah, like other than that, all of my like tracks are bare. There's nothing on it but an EQ. So I'll mix with volume. I won't necessarily mix with a bunch of other stuff. Speaking of hardware, what is the Blackmagic product you referred to earlier called? It is called an Ultra Studio HD Mini. If I come up here, go to my studio setup, you can see in the studio setup, I have a video player, and the video player is the HD Studio Mini. When I have this activated, my on-screen video won't play anymore, but all the processing that it takes to play back that video will go through the HD Studio Mini. You can get bigger ones too, but like the Mini was just, it's perfect. I don't need like crazy time code sync and stuff like that. I just need something that plays back the video. How often you get a project that requires you to do the whole workflow, or do you mostly work as a part of a team? I find a lot of indie projects that I get. Typically, I will do the entire thing. This show that I'm working on with the submarine this year, I'm just the sound effects editor. So I'm doing the BGs and I'm doing the sound design. Once I'm done, and this goes back to the previous question: do you mix as you go? Yes, I will do a volume mix as I go, because when I deliver my sound effects session, I don't want the levels to be so unheard of. And if I quickly stop streaming, I'll explain why. So on your desk, you have these faders. These faders go from 0 to 12 at the. Let me pick a closer one. These faders go from 0 to 12 on the top end. So there's a lot of movement here. But if my mixes are very loud, I will turn down my mix. But now all of a sudden I'm jumping like 10 dB by these really, really small moves. And it's a lot more jumpy. So if I mix up here, this movement where it was 10 dB is now only 6. So it's better if you mix volume wise as you go, because I can now just ride very small adjustments as I go through. That's typically why I mix as I go, because then the sound effects editor or the re-recording mixer don't have to deal with like these really big fader movements or really, really tiny fader movements. And how many times do I have to do the entire workflow? I'd say about 50% of the projects I get in do that. The feature film that I'm doing next year or next month, I'll be doing the entire thing myself. The next feature film I'll be doing all myself, which I can part out sound designers to help me out with the workflow and stuff like that. But the other project, we're just doing sound effects. So it's about 50-50. Can't live without Q3. Yeah, fantastic EQ. But again, if I go back to the DAW, share the screen. Nope, the screen. So if I go back to the DAW, most of like stock EQs that come with Nuendo are really, really good. Plugins like Doppler. I have yet to find a Doppler that's better than just the stock one that comes inside of Nuendo. You basically just set your start time, you move your you move your transport, you create your transition, you add where the listener is, and then you create an endpoint, and then it will automatically create you a feed. So it's like, yeah, Pro Q3 works, but man, you'd be so surprised how much you can do with just like the stock plugins. How often do you use harmonic plugins on effects? I myself find my reaching for pro harmonic tools to boost the low end. I would love to get low air. I use low air. It is on my music tracks. So up here, I believe I have it as a send. I'm pretty sure I have it as a send on this. Effects track, music. Mono reverb, DX. FX delay. Yeah, I do use. Here, I'll just pull up my thing. I'll find it. Speakerphone, yeah, low air. So my music LFE, I use low air on. Really helps. I also use low air on my LFE tracks as well. So low air, I use them quite often actually. It really helps kind of like beef it up. Do you suggest naming tracks, track 1, track 2, etc., by the effects name like metal hit character? No. Typically, what I end up doing is because if you name tracks like that, then you're committing that one track to be that specific thing. I just do effects M1, effects M2, effects M3, effects M4. M is mono, S is stereo, and then LFE is just LFE. Yeah, because like on these tracks, I could very well cut like a fire, and then immediately after that, cut like a door closing. So like name these tracks, I'm kind of committing to them. Where all of a sudden you end up with like 100 tracks. In an effects delivery, would you have volume automation or would you volume control be done via clip gain? Typically, if you're doing like an effects for a film, you're dealing with clip gain. You don't really do with automation. When the re-recording mixer implements your session into their template and their project, typically what ends up happening is they will delete all of your automation. So typically not. I wonder if I have a quick session I can show you. Unfortunately, I have to end the stream in 20 minutes, so because I have been capped. Let me see if I can find one I can show you. Open. There was one that I was showing off on Discord every now and then. Release all purple. Real love. I don't know if I have this session on Drive anymore though. Long lost, maybe. Oh, cool. Yeah, I do. Okay, so let's wait for that there to open. I'll kind of walk you through what a big production template kind of looks like. And by the way, the session that I'm opening now is not my template. It is a template from another mixer. I won't be able to play any of the sounds that are in this mix, but I can definitely show you what's kind of going on. Okay, let's hide you and you. Don't need to see any of that. Okay, and this is... Oh, this is just the Bee Gees, eh? Okay. Either way, it'll kind of get the point across, I guess. So here is a BG session. There is no automation on any of the tracks, but what I end up having is just clip gain, volume automation, make sure that everything is sort of consistent. We do have 4 stereo tracks, which again, you don't need to always fill out. We just whatever you can to make the room. Do you work for any post houses? Any opinions on them? I do work for post houses every now and then. The 2 films that I'm working on are coming from post houses, which they just hire me out to do like specific things or specific processes. But yeah, post house generally reach out to get freelancers to work on their stuff. But here's a big tip here. We usually do a bunch of this kind of stuff. A workflow that I've developed, which I haven't seen anyone do, but I'm really, really happy with, is I will actually go, if I come up to the video track, Nuendo has this awesome tool called cut detection. Do a cut detection panel. And essentially what it will do is it will analyze the video for all of the cuts in the actual clip. Once it's done that, you'll get a giant marker track. And then what I do is now every time that we are inside the bookstore, I just put that marker down here. So now every time that we're in the bookstore is here, 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 and here. So now I can quickly navigate a 2-hour and 30-minute video. And I have the same thing for like downtown or outside or inside the lodge or at the mom's pantry garage or all this other stuff. I wonder if I have, oh, I really wish I had the effects session so I can kind of show you how the effects are done. Let me see if I can find it. Open. Typically what ends up happening is when I'm done a film, I zip it and then I upload it to a online storage so I get most of the stuff off of my session. or off my drive because the sessions can get quite big. I wonder, do I have this one here? No, remove it. File, open. Yeah, unfortunately, I do not. Oh, wait, no, this might be it. Nope, still remove. Yeah, so I don't have like a session that I can open because either they're not released yet or I've already gotten rid of off my drive. But if anyone is curious, just shoot me a message on Discord and I can see if I can download one and pull it up. And then I can kind of hop into a live chat with some people. How do you generally have reverb set up? I'll show you. Open. Just take me a second to reopen the template. It's a big template, so let's throw that here. Would you build, for example, the bookstore BG and then copy and paste on the timeline using your markers? Yeah, that's effectively the big goal with it. Is I would like to be able to build out the static room tone of the actual shot and then paste it down the timeline, and then we would go into the BG effects, which I can then go through and like add a car by every now and then, or I can add more traffic or crickets if it's nighttime or anything like that. But shout out to Bandicoot sitting in BGs. Yeah, I know, right? So I would very much want to like copy and paste a lot of those BGs. It helps with the space. And that way, if the main reason why I was doing it was if you needed to make an update or a change to some of the BGs, it's very quickly to then just go through your entire timeline and like make changes to all the BGs because you know where they all are, rather than having to rewatch the entire film and make sure that you don't miss anything. For the reverbs, very straightforward. Dialogue is the only one that's sort of different because dialogue is king in those instances. But essentially what I have here is a dialogue tracks. I have a mono reverb set up, which is always kind of playing. It really helps hide some of the slower transitions, or it helps blend together certain scenes, places everyone in a room. It's just a really tight room too. Like it's not anything crazy. It's barely noticeable. But essentially it's just a small room, 756 milliseconds. Like it's tiny. But for the reverbs themselves, you can see here, I have a single room for the interior, a single room for the exterior. I have a one for the transitions. So if we go from inside to outside, outside to inside, but then inside to inside, I'll use the transition reverb as a way to kind of like help bridge those gaps. And again, you can just like increase the verb here, and then you can increase the interior one there, and you can quickly kind of do all that. For the delay, I have two delays here, one for different types of spaces. So if we're outside, I will typically use less reverb. So if we're outside, I'll use like a little bit of reverb, and then I'll use a little bit of delay. It helps kind of make the outside reverbs not sound artificial. Whereas if you don't use delay, you'll have more reverb in order to get the desired sort of effect that you're looking for. So I typically use reverbs in that way. But yeah, that's kind of where that's at. And if anyone's curious, the only delay plugin I use now is Slapper by the Cargo Cult. It's a very easy delay unit to use. So essentially you have all of these nodes, and they all correspond to time. You can dampen them, and when you dampen them, they change color. So as you dampen it, it gets less bright. As you don't dampen it, they get more bright. If you want to add slight reverb to it, it creates a little tail so you know how much reverb is being applied. You can pan the reverb up and down, or so you pan the delay up and down. You can even rotate the entire delay as well, which is super handy. I can delay it. I can up the gain. So if you play this reverb or you play this delay, it's very easy to find out that it's going to be a very do sound. Whereas if you play it back, oh yeah, and the feedback are all these rings. You can get infinite feedback. it's a super easy delay to kind of like understand, and they come with a bunch of like typical presets like schoolyard. There's your schoolyard delay. Last ish 13 minutes. Does anyone else have any other questions? I really going to remember how to do this. I know there was a way to do it. So it's all that, and I think it is this. I remember how I do remember how to do it. Feedback dampening, link all, link selected, tap select, default select reverb. I know there's a way to pan, like completely rotate all of these, which was a really cool effect I used like once. What's something later that I learned that I wish I learned earlier? Something later that I wish I learned earlier. Compression is one of those things. Really, just like plugins. If you heavily rely on plugins because you see other people using them, it's not helpful to learn that way. So, like, I've seen a bunch of people that would compress their dialogue because they feel like they should, instead of what's it called? Having a reason for compression, right? So if I want to compress my dialogue, it's usually because it's really dynamic, and I want to find ways of doing that so it's not intrusive. So my whole goal always is to like do less processing, keep things sounding natural as humanly possible. So I would burn a lot of. I made a lot of mistakes starting out where it was just like everything was either over compressed because I was compressing with 6 dB of gain reduction because I thought that's what everyone was doing, when realistically that's not what everyone's doing because it just isn't. It's very minimal compression. Apply plugins as you need them and then have a reason for doing it. That being said, I do run Soothe because everyone else does. What are some good methods for balancing room tone between camera angle cuts? Essentially it really comes down to like inside to outside is hard. Just because like outside is really, really wide and you'll notice that cut versus inside it's really, really tight. So you won't have as many and I'm just realizing I'm touching. So yeah, you like inside is very tight sounding. It's very closed versus as soon as you go outside, it's really wide. So the wide sound tends to sound louder. Realistically, it's just like you do it via volume. Make sure that all of your ambiances are evenly spaced out within the frequency spectrum, and then also make sure that you can comfortably fade in and fade out. Some directors don't mind hard cuts. If you watch films like the Munich, a lot of the times when they cut inside to outside, they're very hard cut. Whereas I can't think of a film off the top of my head, but like you can do longer fade ins and longer fade outs. But typically that would be a conversation you would have with your re-recording mixer where they would either want one frame fades, which is typically what I see. But you can, okay. You can do one frame fades. There you go, dude. You can do one frame fades, or you can do like 4 frames fades, two frames on either side, which will help seamlessly transition there. I don't typically like doing longer fades than that because then you tend to like lead into every cue. But really just balance each element, really try to create the spaces and then match the volume kind of going into it. If you're going from an inside quiet space to an outside loud space, you're not going to be able to match the volume. It just is what it is. But try to create your edits as smoothly as humanly possible. For music tracks, should we work with master tracks? Kind of. It makes my workflow a lot easier. Typically, yes. However, if you're working with like emotion and you want to like the drums are just too freaking loud, working with stems can really help. It really just comes down to like what you're trying to achieve. If you have like a music montage thing, yeah, just working with the master track is totally fine. If it's getting scored, sometimes it's helpful to actually have the drums on one section. It's helpful to have the strings on another section, the brass on another section, or vice versa. One more, if I may. Can you elaborate more on the supervising sound editor role and what stage of the role they start working at in post or before? Typically, the sound designer and the the supervising sound editor will be on early in the production. They'll tend to end up like building their own team. So this is where you get a lot of like, well, I know a freelancer that can do this, and I know a freelancer that can do that. Yeah, that's typically where they end up coming in. The supervising sound editor is typically the person that you'll be talking to. They will organize everything, while the sound designer itself is like worried about the overall sonic landscape of the film. So it's just like an assistant director is where you'll be talking to the person the most, and then the director will take orders from the assistant director, or vice versa. The assistant director will take orders from the director. Which, I mean, games are my hype for it. Man, I don't have time for games half the time. I wish. The new Final Fantasy is going to be fantastic. New up and coming games. Anything Dark Souls related, I'm super happy for. I know they're doing Armor Wars or Armor Core. That'll be fun. Spider-Man game was really good, so I'm excited for that one. Aliens Dark Descent, I'm also excited for. But again, I surprisingly enough, I don't play mini games all that much anymore. We're doing the Master Gun stuff, so it's just like that's been taking up way too much of my time. How's your home studio set up for mixing film? Do you have a surround sound system? How is it? Any tips about it? Yeah, so I have, you can see my back speaker there. That room there is an ADR booth and a sound effects recording booth. So we're doing that up so that way I'll have like a proper space to record more sound effects, record more Foley, record more all that other stuff. So it's like a 9x6 by something room. So that's super helpful. But yeah, I do have a 5.1 setup back here with a big screen up there. I will eventually do like a desk setup when it's not looking this disgusting, because it is. But yeah, what was the question? How is your home studio set up modern motion films? Do you have a surround sound system, and how any tips on that? But yeah, essentially just like having a room that isn't symmetrical is helpful. Sound treatment is better than speakers in terms of like getting a good sounding room versus getting like shitty sounding speaker or good sounding speakers. If they're good sounding speakers in a shitty sounding room, they're not good. I use the Genelex 8040s. I think they're about 500 each. I do want to eventually upgrade to 7.1.4. So that is 7 surround speakers, 1 sub, and then 4 ceiling speakers, so I can play around with height. I've never had a mix that really required that I would have to mix at my house. Other than that, we end up going to Vancouver and renting like an actual soundstage for that. As a fellow Nuendo user, I have a lot of questions, but I subscribe to your channel anyway, so I'll definitely check it out. Yeah, if you have any questions, just shoot me up a message on Discord. I have a lot of like Nuendo workflow tips and stuff like that. Nuendo is my absolute daily driver. I am not a fan of Pro Tools, although I do work in it all the time. So when I found out Nuendo can export AAFs and I can just import them into Pro Tools, it made my life so much easier. Last 5-ish minutes, and then I end up getting cut off. But again, if anyone has any questions after this here, just hit me up on Discord, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I'm usually around on most spaces. Or on Airwiggles. I actually do now have notifications set up on my phone, which is so much helpful. Why Nuendo over Pro Tools? I'm going to anger the 21 people here that actually use Pro Tools. I'm just not a fan of it. The workflow is very old school versus Nuendo. It's Nuendo has a lot of features that are like post-production friendly. Like, for example, if I just very quickly toggle screen sharing, go here. I don't have a shitload of time left. But if I, for example, do you have any secret funny sounds that you like to sneak into a mix? Yeah, I do. I like, while I don't own a cat, I have a dog. He's back there somewhere. cat sounds are always fun to sneak into things. But the reason what I'm saying is like with why Nuendo is a little more like user friendly. If I go to my ambiances and I go to 5.1, and I'm just going to drag in a sound onto my BGs. So here is a 5.1. Here's a 5.1 BG on a stereo track. It will automatically downmix it. So if you notice my playhead here, I'll bring this down in volume. It's 5.1, but it's playing in stereo. But if I bring this down to the mono tracks, it automatically converts it to mono. Like there are things where you can do in Nuendo that just makes sense. Like if I want to add another marker track, I can. I can just add another marker track. It's not a big deal. I can now create as many markers as I want for here, which is how I was doing the what's it called? The location scouting, so like the bookstore and all that other stuff. You can't do that in Nuendo or in Pro Tools, which is again it's just a workflow thing. So like it works for me. I like Nuendo for the most part so far. Pro Tools seems better to learn because they're able to work and collaborate. Yes, absolutely. If like I'm not like selling Nuendo over top of Pro Tools. Like if you're going to work in film, you absolutely need to learn Pro Tools. You do not need to like get the most expensive version of Pro Tools in order to be able to do this here. But if you're going to work in any sort of collaborative format, you absolutely should know Pro Tools. As a Pro Tools user and someone who has had to use Avid, it sometimes feels like I have to wrestle with it rather than having to work with it. Yeah, I feel the same way with it. There are small things, and even just like if I bring up my automation panel, and again, using the Stream Deck is insanely helpful. Even doing stuff like these automation modes, like preview, punch, trim, stuff like that, they super help save me a ton of time. And realistically, the only reason why I went with Nuendo was because my mentor was using it. So like it was very much like, okay, let's learn Nuendo and then like learn how to like work with Pro Tools and stuff like that with Nuendo. The other thing that it does really well is if I come up to here, for example, I can see my routing chain. Like my BGA goes to my BG bus, which goes to my effects bus, which then goes into my master bus. And if there's a if for example, I'm playing a sound here, it's coming out here, but it's not coming out here. I know there's something wrong on this track. I click on it, it takes me to that track. There's just a couple of things like that. Thanks so much for doing this. Definitely appreciate all. Yeah, thanks, man. I've had a lot of fun. I don't do as many live streams just because I tend to say stupid shit. But no, this was a lot of fun. Scripted stuff is definitely kind of more my area because I can actually get out what I want to say in a much shorter period of time than just sitting here. I have a bad tendency to ramble, which I'm over the last bit of time now. So if there's any last minute questions, please feel free to just shoot me out a message on like Discord, Twitter, Instagram, or stuff like that, and I will try to respond to as many of you guys as you can. And yeah, Aircon's been a lot of fun. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day. Again, YouTube channels After Touch Audio. So if you have any questions, just shoot me a message.